I'm RoleAne Marks. Welcome to Modiin and Beyond. Join me every Sunday between 3 and 4 on Radio Modiin as we take a look at what's happening in Modiin, Israel, and beyond. You know, I do that to trick you guys, right? It's really Tuesday, but I think with all of us right now, every day is bleeding into each other. But welcome to it. I'm RoleAne Marks. This is Modiin and Beyond on Radio Modiin. I'm so happy today because I'm joined in studio by my good friend David Lange. He is the executive director of IsraellyCool. We're going to be talking about so many cool things.
Hopefully we can talk about cool things.
We are, because you know what is cool is that we're showing up to fight, and you have an incredible campaign that we're going to talk about coming up. But my first guest, all the way from quite close to Jerusalem, he is the president of the Genesis 123 Foundation. He is a good friend to us, a prolific writer, Jonathan Feldstein. Welcome back to Modiin and Beyond.
RoleAne, it's always a pleasure, and I especially thank you today for reminding me what day of the week it is, because all the days have been kind of blurring together, as I know you understand.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask you the question that we all seem to be asking each other right now, and it's, how are you doing?
No worse than anyone else in our country.
Absolutely. I think, David, you and I had this discussion a couple of weeks ago. It's a moment-to-moment experience for most of us. And as Jews right now, we're looking around the world, we're seeing these protests. I tell you, I still can't wrap my head around what I am seeing. Sometimes I think it's Orwellian, and often we think that we are so alone as a people, but we're not. We have extraordinary support coming from our Christian brothers and sisters. And you work very, very closely with Christian communities around the world. How are our Christian brothers and sisters showing up to help us during what I think is the darkest time in our generation?
It's a great question. It is the darkest time in our generation, and I would say arguably since the Holocaust. And yet, as you know this, it's hard living here through the war right now on so many levels, but it's also incredibly inspiring. And I wish everyone listening, everyone in the world, all the Jews, could experience a fraction of the love and support that I am privy to and part of from Christian friends. And it's literally all around the world. We're seeing it, RoleAne, in so many ways. And in fact, you mentioned me generously being a prolific writer. I don't know if that means I'm a good writer, but I've been writing a lot. And a forthcoming article is about this and how we've seen what I believe is an historically unprecedented level of support from Christians for Israel and the Jewish people. And I don't mean just since the founding of the state 75 years ago. I'm talking about historically ever. And I can go into many, many different ways as to how we're seeing that support play out. And it's not just me. There are a number of other Jews here in Israel who have the privilege of doing what I do on a day-to-day basis. I do it on behalf of the Genesis 123 Foundation. But there's so many ways in which the support, the encouragement, the prayers, of course, the financial support has been just incredible, above and beyond.
Now, you sent me an article a couple of days ago. The Tanzanian hostage, or one of the Tanzanian hostages, Clemens Matanga, was unfortunately murdered by Hamas terrorists. And as somebody who comes from Africa, it's very, very personal for me as an Israeli and as somebody who grew up on the African continent, because there are many out there who don't realize that there is a lot of foreign nationals that are being held hostage in those horrific Hamas terror tunnels as well. And Clemens was a young student, an agricultural student here on an exchange to learn skills, to learn from our agricultural specialists, all from around the South, those communities now almost decimated by the terrorists. And Clemence was killed. He was only 21 years old. And you sent me an article which really touched my heart, and that is how everybody is showing up to ensure that he has a funeral with honor, with the honor that befits somebody who's gone through what he went through and who was murdered in such a way. And you can see I'm tearing up because it really doesn't take much these days to get me started.
I'm tearing up as well, and I mean, you don't even know this, but literally right now, as we're speaking, is the beginning of his funeral service in a Catholic church in the Kilimanjaro region of Tanzania. And I believe for a number of years that Israel needs to do more by way of standing with and support of terror victims and their families who are not Israeli, who are not Jewish. We have, as horrible as we suffer together as Israeli Jews from terror, we have a support network, we have a country. And yet there are many families, like the family of Clemence Matenga, who are alone geographically, who don't, yes, they lost their son, they lost their brother, he was the youngest of four, but there's no one there who's relating to them on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people today, except for my good friend, Bishop Daniel Uma, who until we met a few years ago had never met a Jew, but had been traveling all over Tanzania, praying for Israel, advocating for Israel. And today he's my representative. He's the representative of the Genesis 123 Foundation at the funeral to pay respects, to comfort the family. And I have to tell you, what's been so beautiful is he has been received literally with VIP support. He had a police escort when he arrived in Kilimanjaro yesterday. They insisted that he stay at the VIP hotel, that this was not just a modest bishop from the eastern parts of Tanzania, western part, excuse me. It's important that we stand together. It's important that we show reciprocal love and solidarity. And I have no doubt that just in the short time that Clemens was here as an agricultural student, he got to experience some of the best of Israel. And I think that that's our obligation to continue to show that.
There is another Tanzanian hostage still being held in those terror tunnels. How do we support him and the family?
Well, we launched a petition over a week ago. I'm so thrilled that thousands of people from some 70 countries already have signed it, and anyone who wants to do so can go to genesis123.co. We have a petition. It's going to the United Nations. It's going to the Red Cross, which my assessment has been abysmal in their lack of care or activity on behalf of any of the hostages, much less the Jewish and Israeli ones, and the heads of the G7 and all of the countries who have nationals who have been taken hostage in Gaza by Hamas. And we need to advocate to bring every single one home. And if that means their corpse, then so be it. I'm praying that anyone who's still alive will stay alive, but I'm sure that many aren't. And I think that having tens and hundreds of thousands sign this petition and then all over the world inundate the United Nations offices and the Red Cross and the embassies of all of the countries, we can give strength to Israel that when the ceasefire ends, we can continue to go about what's necessary and painful to do, but that will ultimately see all of the hostages released.
You know, one thing I noticed with the International Red Cross, apart from their abysmal attitude and lack of care for those who have been taken hostages, and we are all praying for Alma Avraham as she fights for
Yeah.
her life after she was so horrifically neglected by the International Red Cross. One thing I noticed, which is a flagrant breach of the Geneva Convention, is allowing the Palestinian prisoners released from jails here to fly Hamas flags in those vehicles. That is a massive breach of international laws and the laws of neutrality under the Geneva Convention that govern the International Red Cross. So that's something to think about putting pressure on as well. What are you? Are you there to facilitate care? And also just a personal observation, when our hostages were taken in Red Cross vehicles, there were no screens to protect their privacy, which I also found quite appalling. The complete lack of care and respect. And you mentioned the United Nations. We haven't heard a peep from UNICEF for our children murdered, brutalized, and held hostage. Don't even get me started on UN Women, who have sent a message to me as a Jewish Israeli woman that the rape, the brutalization, the gender-based violence thrust upon our beautiful Jewish sisters with the intention of dirtying them. It took them 50 days, David and Jonathan, to be alarmed. I don't know if I am so alarmed at reports of gender-based violence. I'm sickened, disgusted, appalled, and outraged.
I share all of that with you, albeit that I am not a woman and I don't identify as one. And it's one of the articles that I wrote recently that actually has gotten particularly wide coverage, because that needs to be acknowledged and called out, that the world has abandoned Jewish Israeli women as mere objects and not caring. It's called Raping for the Oh, well, you helped me, RoleAne, with the title, Raping for the Resistance. And it's so important. It's one of these battles that we're just going to have to continue to fight. What happened is vulgar and unacceptable.
And we also published it with a number of your articles on layoftheland.online. That's layoftheland.online. Jonathan, if we go back 6 months, many young Christians were starting, not all of them, but many of them were starting to believe the rhetoric coming from groups like BDS and others. Have you noticed a change following the horrific atrocities on the 7th of October?
So in 2000, I believe 21, there were two surveys released identifying the trend you just spoke about, that young Christians, millennials, were significantly showing much lower signs of interest and support for Israel than their parents' generation, by 50% in the decade that followed. And that's scary and that's dangerous, and something that we're addressing at the Genesis 123 Foundation. It's a long-term and I think urgent priority. As to your question, I can't identify specifically if there's been a particular shift in the last several weeks on a broad basis, but I will say this: I've definitely seen young Christians and older Christians standing up with Israel in this incredible and historic wave of support that I'm witnessing. It'll be interesting to see how far that goes. Although I'm looking at an article that I've not shared with you yet. It's a 4,000 word piece that I was asked to write by a pastor friend in Kentucky whose nephew attends a Christian law school and was harassed by another Christian law student with rhetoric that you won't be shocked about, but is shocking nonetheless, about how evil Israel is. And that's coming from a Christian law student, so somebody in that generation. And I took the time to write 4,000 words in response to all of her sick diatribe. And so even if there is an increase, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And it's so critical that Jews get behind this as well, because we have been relying on the fact that there are tens of millions of Christians all over the world who support us. And that's true, but we can't take that for granted.
Absolutely. We can't take that for granted. And we need to work more closely with our Christian brothers and sisters, and especially pray and think of those being held hostage by Hamas, who come from around the world, who are not Jewish. We do it in the memory of Clemence Matanga. May he rest in peace. May his memory be blessed. And as we would say here, may his blood be avenged, and we stand with the Tanzanian people in their time of mourning. Jonathan Feldstein, the president of the incredible Genesis 123 Foundation, thank you so much for everything that you do, not just your incredible writing skills, but to build real bridges between Israel and the Christian world.
Thank you, RoleAne. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Only a pleasure. On the other side of this, I'm going to be speaking to David Lange. And one thing that we do now is we fight back. We will no longer apologize for our existence. And David is going to share how IsraellyCool has been fighting back in the narrative war on the other side of this.
It's a game you play to
Who can remember the movie Young Blood with Rob Lowe? Rob Lowe, really, really pro-Israel. David and I were talking about during the break. Stand in the Fire. Mickey Thomas, I mean, that is a blast from the past. Now, David, you're probably one of the most busy people on the planet right now. I think there's very, very few things that you aren't doing. You really are on the vanguard in the fight against anti-Semitism in many ways, exposing some of the vile anti-Semites, but also engaging in conversation with people who might have predisposed ideas about Israel, about the war, and also running a phenomenal campaign right now highlighting your work. So before we get into some of the dodgy characters that you deal with on a daily basis, and I'm not talking about me, let's discuss your campaign, because you launched the campaign on Sunday.
Yes, so like many nonprofits, I'm running my end of year campaign a little bit early. I tried to get in after Thanksgiving and before Hanukkah.
It is Giving Tuesday
And
today,
today's Giving
folks.
Tuesday as well. So all those things going on. So, as a nonprofit, this is how we keep going. I'm running it on the Cause Match platform, and it's the IsraellyCool end of year campaign, just to basically be able to not just continue what we're doing, but actually expand our activities. Because at the moment, we're a bit of a one-man band, and you're looking at the singer, the dancer, the everything.
The trombone player,
and
the drummer.
all of that. And, as you mentioned, I'm very busy. And, I keep saying I love what I do, but I hate that there's a need to do it. So if tomorrow there's peace and everyone in the world loves Jews, I'll be the happiest unemployed guy on the planet, and I'll just have to find something else to do with my time. Maybe I'll become a cricket player if they'll take me. But in any event, very busy, and I want to be able to build on the wonderful platform that I've been blessed with and been able to build over the last 20 years actually.
Good. So how do we get involved?
Well,
don't be shy.
Well, RoleAne, actually, you know how people can get involved because you are one of my trusty ambassadors. So thank you very much for that, for standing behind IsraellyCool, not just having me on for these wonderful discussions that we have and for your friendship, but, standing behind it where it counts. So there is a link that hopefully will be publicized on the YouTube channel, because I don't remember it off by heart, RoleAne. You have your own special identifier at the end. But if the easy way, I guess, is for people just to go to IsraellyCool.com, and at the top there's a donate area, and if you click on that, it will go straight to the end of year campaign. And if people would like to contribute in this fight in that way, there's so many wonderful causes.
Yeah.
And of course, we've all been contributing to these causes. First and foremost, our wonderful soldiers, the IDF, and all associated causes. There's MADA, there's, speaking about the International Red Cross, but MADA, who are not part of the International Red Cross, in another sign of their anti-Semitism. They have the Red Crescent and the International Red Cross, but Magen David Adom are not part of that. Go figure, right? No one's surprised by that. Hatzalah, I could go on and on with a wonderful organization. So if anyone has a bit of leftover, so what I want to say is, as much as I would love people to contribute to the campaign, first and foremost to those other frontline organizations, IsraellyCool, we are on the digital battlefield, which is very important.
Extremely important.
But, in perspective. So
look out for my personal link to David's campaign. Is going to be posted on my social media along with the YouTube clip of the show. It'll be on my Facebook and on my X account a little later. But let's talk tachlis, because you are on the front line, and the digital battlefield is just as important, because we are fighting a narrative war, and we are up against a very, very, very sophisticated enemy, 100 times our size, with immense financial backing, and able to spew some of the most putrid rhetoric that is imaginable. And you do a lot. You expose the haters. You also give kavod to the people who are standing up for us. I noticed yesterday Conor McGregor, who dealt a knockout smack to the TSEC, the Prime Minister of Ireland, Leo Varadkar. No TSEC. Emily Hand and 240 other people did not get lost in a terror tunnel. They were taken there by Hamas terror operatives with the intent to create further anxiety, terror, and play psychological warfare with their families and the state of Israel. No, she didn't get lost. She's not a sock. And also, you've been engaged in quite a number of debates. You and I were on a panel just a couple of weeks ago, which really exercised our intellectual, philosophical skills. But you engaged Mark Lamont Hill. Tell us, first of all, who Mark Lamont Hill is and a bit about the discussion that you had with him.
Yes, so Mark Lamont Hill, for those that don't know, is a Temple University professor whose main claim to fame, or infamy rather, was a number of years ago being sacked by CNN as a political commentator because he appeared before the UN and he chanted "From the river to the sea," which we all know is a genocidal chant. And
take notes, BBC.
And all the others. And I've been writing about him a lot since then. I've been exposing what I've seen as anti-Semitic pronouncements, anti-Semitic behavior from his part, support for terrorism. So and after a number of posts, he's been trying to challenge me to a debate. And in the past, I've been a bit reticent about doing that because I felt that, I don't want to give him even more exposure, although I do like highlighting people's anti-Semitism and terror support, of course, but something twigged in me this time around. So in my previous post, or my latest post about him, I wrote about how he appeared at a rally, I believe it was in Chicago or Boston, if I'm not mistaken. And again, with the chants, and it seemed to me that this was another affirmation of his position that Israel as a Jewish state shouldn't exist. So he didn't like it. I think the title of the post was something like Mark Lamont Hill's lame defense of From the River to the Sea, or something along those lines. My titles tend to be a little bit on the less subtle side because that's the way of social media. You want to get eyeballs and you want people to read on.
And also we're done being subtle. We are done being subtle.
The gloves are off. Indeed. And so, of course, he didn't like that and he challenged me to a debate again. And I said this time, yes, I'll do it. And I think because what I'm seeing now is, Baruch Hashem, there are so many more people on the digital battlefield on our side than there were in the past.
Yes.
And so many people are there fighting the good fight. To put a little bit of rain on the parade, there's a lot of, I believe, preaching to the choir that goes on. So a lot of us do get a bit carried away with the number of, look at how many views my tweet got, look how many likes, look how many retweets. But if you want to drill down, I suspect that a lot of it's just patting each other on the back. Now, don't get me wrong, there is an importance to that.
We have to, especially when we're fighting an optics war.
Yes, and we need the morale. We've been down. We had the discussion a number of weeks ago, our little therapy session here with Adam. And, it is very important. So I don't want to belittle that in any way. But if we really want to fight this war effectively, we have to get beyond the choir. So yes, getting our material, our posts retweeted is important because it can get to the eyeballs of other people. But we have to do more than that. So what I've been trying to do is engage with the people who are even on the anti-Semitic side. I don't think I would have a debate with someone like Keith Woods or a Tiki Torch anti-Semite, if you know what I mean. But the people that actually don't even think they're anti-Semitic, who don't believe it, and whose audiences, this is the key, whose audiences would also consist of people, I call them the fence-sitters or the intellectually honest people, that they haven't made up their minds fully, that there is some hope for them. And that was my whole purpose in accepting Mark Lamont Hill's challenge to a debate. Now, the debate was on his channel. It was always going to be on his terms. In sporting parlance, I call it the home ground advantage. I knew that by appearing on this, if I look at the YouTube comments, they're going to be mostly against me and for Mark and saying how great Mark is and how terrible I was. And of course, that did come to fruition. But, luckily, I prepared myself for that. I wanted to appear calm at all times in this debate, even though I'm a very passionate guy about my position. And I was listening to Mark spout what he spouted. And inside, I really wanted to just jump in at every available opportunity and just school him. I knew I had to remain cool, calm, collected, because it's not just about the substance, but it's about the form. You want to come across to the people sitting on the fence, not as this angry guy, because already the narrative that the Mark Lamont Hills of the world want to portray to the world is that we're the aggressor. So if you come to a debate and you are in aggressor mode, as it were, you already are conceding valuable ground. So these were all the sorts of things I had in mind. But at the end of the day, I wanted to get certain points across. So even if a handful of people watching that weren't already pro-Israel will already start to question their positions. And best case scenario, even more people become more pro-Israel because they see that Mark Lamont Hill, who is, his intellect is valued by many people, he got schooled in some way. So that's what I set out to achieve.
One thing I have noticed, reading a lot of articles and looking at a lot of YouTubes, is the silent majority seem to be standing with us. They don't feel maybe intellectually competent, or they don't feel strong enough to go out there and take to the streets or take to social media. But what I have noticed quite a lot is that we do have the support of more people than we realize. I think what has really tipped a lot in our favor is the behavior of the pro-Palestinian, or we'll call them pro-Hamas sector. I think when you maraud through the streets of New York or London or Paris and you deface war memorials and you use aggressive language and you assault police officers and you spout off genocidal rhetoric, that's not helping your cause. I mean, from our part, I say, here you go. Do you want a flare? I'll help you with it. Their behavior is so ludicrous compared to what you are seeing from us. And I looked at London on Sunday with such joy to see what is estimated now at 120,000 people. Many Christians, many Kurds, many Iranians marching peacefully, singing God Save the King. The cenotaph didn't have to be protected, waving Union flags. And you're seeing this contrast in behavior and in people's attitudes towards Israel. Well, I am. Are you seeing any of that?
Well, as you said, it's silent, so it's a bit hard to ascertain, but I think there is a lot of that. It makes sense. And what you just described has been my philosophy the whole time, what I've been seeing for so long, and the philosophy behind IsraellyCool, which is, I'm not about necessarily shutting down these people in terms of getting their Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, Instagram accounts banned. Because I believe that actually one of our best weapons are their own words and behavior. It's hoisting them on their own petard, to quote a famous playwright. So, and we're seeing that, as you said, we're seeing it so much more now. And as you mentioned, these protests are seen to the vilest of behaviour. In Australia, a place like Australia, where I was brought up, we had, these cries at Sydney Harbour, outside the Sydney Opera House, gas the Jews, F the Jews. And you just, get the cameras on these people, shine the light on them and let them just take it away. Yeah. And then, of course, people like me, you, and other people on social media can then amplify that and say, look, these people you really want to be supporting. And in contrast, as you mentioned, our side, beautiful, love. There isn't this hate and invective. I mean, you don't see at our rallies people calling for, Gaza to be wiped off the face of the planet.
If anything, you see a lot of empathy.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think any of us are anti-Palestinian. I think we're all pro-Palestinian. We all want to see Palestinians live, with dignity, but we are vehemently anti-Hamas.
Well, we're anti-Hamas, anti-terror, and all those that support Hamas, which is unfortunately a lot of people that we're seeing around the world. So, at the end of the day, we need to be forthright in our position and at the same time use their own vile behavior against them.
Oh, well, as Douglas Murray, who's such a friend to
It's
us,
amazing.
as he so brilliantly said, every now and then you fire up that flare and it illuminates those around you. So we certainly see who they are. And they are some usual protagonists: Mark Ruffalo, Roger Waters, George Galloway. And then there is Wokey Horror.
Yes, I'm proud of that one. It's up there with Shirley Temper.
But you know what I loved that you said that she took too much of a jump to the left.
All right, so you want to explain? I mean, most of your listeners probably know who we're talking about, but maybe some of the younger listeners who aren't well versed in great musicals.
Okay, well, look, she hasn't had a career hit for a number of years. I mean, the metaphor that she drove off a cliff at the end of Thelma and Louise is not lost on me. It's Susan Sarandon, who was in Thelma and Louise like a million years ago and was in Rocky Horror, and she really hasn't done anything of significance since then, now dropped by her agency UTA. But really, really appalling behavior. Take it away.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, she was dropped from her agency, and many news reports are claiming that she was dropped by her agency for being pro-Palestinian. And that's the usual obfuscation from the usual suspects, because that's not why she was dropped. If anyone was truly pro-Palestinian, they were in support of the civilians, there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that.
But she's gone too far. And at a recent anti-Israel rally, she said something along the lines of, now the Jews, with their anti-Semitism, are now feeling what it's like to be a Muslim in America. That's what she said. Now, leaving aside the fact that that's an absolute inversion of reality, Jews make up about 2.4% of the US population, but according to FBI statistics, are the subject of about 60% of hate crimes. So, we don't, not to compare whose persecution is worse, but ours is compared to Muslims. And in fact, there was a lovely Muslim lady whose name escapes me right now, who tweeted in response to the Wokey Horror and she mentioned, she emigrated, I think, from Pakistan. She emigrated pregnant, out of wedlock, and how America brought her in, and what a wonderful life she's led. With all democracy, freedom of speech, and all the wonderful parts of living in a democracy like America, which, by the way, we also enjoy here in Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. And so she really put the Wokey Horror in her place. United Talent Agency, UTA, also put her in her place. They were representing Susan Sarandon, and they dropped her because actually what she said goes beyond pro-Palestinian. It's actually anti-Semitic.
It's flagrantly
to belittle
anti-Semitic.
to first of all talk directly to Jews, not Zionists. She got sloppy, but Jews, and to invert reality in this disgusting, amoral way. It's appalling. So she was actually dropped by them. I noticed that since October the 7th, she's been very active on Twitter, on X. I keep calling it Twitter.
Me too. Sorry, Elon. I mean, I know you're doing a phenomenal job while you're here, but
sorry, but go back to Twitter. It's easier to say. Be that as it may, so she basically had been very active, and then she's gone very radio silent. Mm-hmm. By the way, she was also radio silent after October the 7th. None of her tweets related to October 7th in terms of condemning the violence, condemning the rape, condemning the war crimes, basically. She only picked up when it came to Israel's response to the Hamas atrocities of October 7th. So that says it all about Susan Sarandon.
And we've seen that as a trend. Mark Ruffalo, Roger Waters, who's a massacre denialist, Galloway, who's a massacre denialist. A lot of people, Gary Lineker, once the great footballer, a lot of controversy in the United Kingdom because he is seen as the de facto face of the BBC. And wouldn't you know it, David, they haven't reeled him in or sanctioned him. Shocker, colour me shook. But we've also, a lot of these female actresses, and I'm talking to you, Alyssa Milano, because I went for her specifically, who were at the vanguard of the Me Too movement. I mean, you couldn't budge for an actress telling their story, which is very, very valid. And of course, as we say, believe all women. Do we say believe all women? Because when it comes to Israeli women, And the eyewitness accounts, the forensic pathologist accounts, the police accounts, Zaka's account, first responders accounts, the Israeli National Rescue Services headed by the brilliant Colonel Golan Vach and the IDF have described their findings, the Chevra Kadisha, preparing bodies of our sisters and our daughters for burial, have all given very, very, very harrowing accounts, heart-wrenching accounts, and yet we are faced with a barrage of silence.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, is it really that out of belief that terrorists, they even GoPro'd their crimes, so there's no question what they did because they were actually filming it. We've seen the film. We've seen part of the filming. Only some journalists that had the stomach to see the full footage have seen it, but we know it exists. I refuse to see it, by the way, because I'm having enough of a hard, we were discussing this, having a hard time sleeping. I don't think I'll be able to ever sleep again if I saw the full footage. But even what I've seen has been horrific, and many of our listeners and viewers have seen these things. So how could anyone doubt that they'll go that next step? It's not even the next step. I mean, rape.
But they've admitted it.
They're admitting it. I mean, this reminds me of something that's actually going on in Australia again. There were some journalists that signed a letter saying that anything from the IDF should be treated with the same skepticism as from Hamas. So they're trying, the journalists, a number of journalists are basically showing their bias now. I mean, how could you equate the two? You have a terrorist organization that shows they have no sense of morality whatsoever. Of course they're going to lie if they're willing to murder innocents and kidnap innocents and rape innocents versus the most moral army in the world.
The minute that we all saw Shani Look, may she rest in peace, and Naaman Levy bleeding from her crotch, hauled before our collective cameras on every TV station, on all social media platforms, we should have heard a round condemnation of revolt from women's organizations and actresses. I've had my own very, very ugly interaction with a woman from the International Alliance of Women. As you know, I am an executive member of World Wheat, so I represent us to the International Alliance of Women. And when I questioned one of their women, I wrote an article about my trip to the South a couple of weeks ago, and she said, I would expect you as a impartial journalist to go into Gaza and report on the findings then. And I said to her, first of all, I can't go into Gaza. As an Israeli, as a Jewish woman, I cannot go in there. She couldn't comprehend that. I said to her, I will be raped and murdered. What do you want from me? But she couldn't bring herself to condemn the atrocities of the 7th of October. Everything was conflated. And then I called her out for that. I said, why do you have to conflate everything? I said, first of all, the 7th of October stands alone in its depravity. And it is possible to allow for us as Israel to experience what we experience. And long story short, she kept on going back. The world feels the victims of Ukraine and Gaza. And I said to the world, of course, and should, but what about our victims? What about our women? And it got to the point where she made accusations against our government that were absolutely salacious, saying that we want to go in and wildly, those were her words, wildly, take over. And I said to her, that's salacious because we've clearly stated we have no intentions of occupying Gaza. There's a very big difference between security and occupation. What that looks like at the moment, of course, we don't know. And her response was so predictable. Her response was, I don't think we should discuss this on LinkedIn anymore, but I can trace my Jewish roots back, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, I have to get the last word in. I have to be Dafka. And I said, I'm sure some of your best friends are Jewish. And we've left it at that. But we, along with all the women's organizations, along with our Misrad HaChutz, our foreign ministry, our government, have embarked on these massive campaigns to highlight what Israeli women, our beautiful sisters, endured on the 7th of October. And we have been met with a wall of silence and just a feeling of how dare you? We don't want to hear from you.
Yeah, no, they've lost all credibility. The gloves are off. These are so-called, I call them so-called human rights organizations, women's rights organizations, but they're frauds. They're absolute frauds. And I believe that they've been infected by what I call the woke mind virus, or this Marxist ideology, because this has been something that had been bothering me for a long time. How can these so-called progressives be supporting or on the side of people that seem to go against all that they supposedly stand for? I mean, look at Gazan society. Look at Hamas. There's no women's rights there. I mean, just besides the wanton murder and mayhem, of course, if you can put that aside for a second. For the women of Gaza, they also, their rights are inhibited. So these people are frauds. They go into this, or they believe this Marxist ideology that there's an oppressor and a victim. And the oppressor is always, by definition, the more powerful party, the more successful party. And the victim is always, by definition, the weaker party. But that's not how life works.
And it's intellectually lazy.
It's very intellectually lazy. It's anti-capitalist. That's where the Marxism comes in. But Israel is successful because we want to help the world. We've always, since the inception of our wonderful modern state, this return of our ancient people to this wonderful homeland of ours, we wanted to not just be accepted amongst the pantheon of nations, but to be a light unto the nations, to benefit humanity. And that's what we've been doing. I'm very proud of what Israel has been able to achieve. And we've wanted to uplift our neighbors. We've wanted to uplift our Palestinian Arab brothers and sisters. Even back in the early days, but pre-state, we were draining the malaria, the swamps of the mosquitoes, getting rid of the malaria. And we were doing this also to benefit the population of Arabs that were living here at the time. And had they just chosen the path of peace and accepted our hand in friendship and peace, then they would also be uplifted. They would also be thriving. And, going back to Gaza, when we withdrew in 2005, we gave them a chance to be, a Singapore. If Hamas had chosen to not divert all the humanitarian aid towards the terror tunnels and the rocket production facilities and all the other terrible abuse of power and money that they've achieved, things would be a lot different. But these so-called human rights organizations refuse to look at this, and they just see us thriving and the Palestinians, because of Hamas, the Gazans, because of Hamas, not thriving. It's, as you said, it's lazy, and I'll go a step further. It's actually an evil train of thought.
It is an evil train of thought. And before we finish up, where do we go from here? Because many of us have been betrayed by friends who've shown us they don't really care about our well-being. I know my story is no different to many others who've cut friends off because they can't be bothered, and it's been a big reckoning, a big wake-up call. We can't trust human rights organizations. I feel we've been betrayed by the International Red Cross who've treated our hostages appallingly. And I don't want to hear the excuse that we can't barge our way in. This is not your first rodeo with war. You're well equipped. You know what to do. We cannot trust the United Nations or any of their agencies. We've been sent a very, very loud message that our lives don't count. It's very, very frightening to send children to school and to universities around the world. And when we do have where we would think we would have allies, we've been met with silence. Where do we go as a people from here? Because I think this has been a massive wake-up call for us. We feel scared, we feel alone, and everything looks so uncertain now.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, we need to focus or maintain our unity. It's a beautiful thing that's come out of the most terrible of atrocities, because we, as I mentioned last time I was here, we seem to forget how we were quite a fractious society before October the 7th, with the whole judicial reform protests, and things got a bit ugly. And now we've all come together, which is fantastic. So I really, truly hope that we can stay together even after the dust settles, if it will ever settle, from this horrible tragedy. So that's one thing I think we need to do, because if we're united, we're unstoppable as a people. We see that through history. We're the most ancient people that lives to this day as a civilization, an indigenous people that has returned to our homeland and has been an utter success. So this is the first thing I think we need to focus on. So to not so much focus on the fact that our so-called friends, fickle friends have betrayed us, but to really focus within and just make sure that we maintain this unity. But yeah, it is important that we reach out to our real friends. And, it's not just the silent majority out there, but we have some loud friends out there, as, Jonathan was mentioning, our Christian brothers and sisters. I think we need to also, our Abrahamic partners. So we already have some good momentum with United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. There was talk of Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords. This has been put on hold, but I believe that once the dust settles, this will be another focus of ours. Because I do believe, in the past, I thought there was a clash of civilizations, and I still believe that. But it's not necessarily on religious grounds. I think within all religions and faith groups, there are people that share our values.
So it's really a clash of values.
It's a clash of values. So it's not Islam versus Judaism, because we, of course, have wonderful Muslim brothers and sisters who hold the same values as us. They do want peace. They want to thrive. They believe in the same God as us. So yeah, we have to focus on this bridge building with our values-based allies. And I believe there's a lot out there. So not to get down, we need to throw the others to the wastebasket, to the dustbin of history, because they were never our friends to begin with. We need to shame them, and we need to, call them out for who they really are.
David Lange, the Executive Director of IsraellyCool. Please check out his website and his social media. And don't forget to support his campaign. You can support through me. All links will be on my social media momentarily. And that's where we leave it for today. A huge thank you to my guests, David, joining me in studio like I like it. Jonathan Feldstein, the President of the Genesis 123 Foundation. Pe'er Atya behind the scenes, nodding his head, giving me a thumbs up, which meant I behaved myself today. I'm RoleAne Marks. This has been Modiin and Beyond on radiomodiin.co.il. Take care of yourself, guys. It's difficult at the moment, but as David so brilliantly said, we're all together, we're all united, and when we are unstoppable. And I'll see you again next week. Take care.
וכשהלילה תם והשמש מאירה, את תדעי מה לעינינו נראה. עצים סביב, רמי צמרת, תחר וכגזע. בתים גדולים סביב, החרוסים הם דהויי צבע. מעליך על הריסות אני אימא, ותאמיני לי אין כאן שום אגס ואין כאן פרח. לא גיבורים אנחנו, כי מלאכתנו שחורה, תשקע השמש תבוא העלתה, ואז ננום בבגדנו במיטה. כן, אמא זה חשוב, זה קשה וזה נורא. לא גיבורים אנחנו, כי מלאכתנו שחורה, תשקע השמש תבוא העלתה, ואז ננום בבגדנו במיטה. כן, אמא זה חשוב, זה קשה וזה נורא. בחיי שזה קשה, אך אני נשאר, אפור האדמה ושחור האופק, וכחול שמיים כאילו משתאה, והוא ממתין ולא נוגע, הוא לא נוגע באופק השחור, ביניהם חלל, שום קשר וכל השאר, וזה קשה מאוד, אך אני נשאר. יש כאן גדר תיל, ואחריה חרב שלופה,